Good afternoon and welcome to the Randwick Local Planning Panel meeting of the 11th of June 2020. I'm the chair of the panel and my name is Annalise Tour. Joining me today via video conference are Julie Savitt-Ward and Oliver Klein as expert members, and the community representative is Michelle Finnegan. In an effort to minimise the spread of COVID-19 and in the best interest of the health and safety of the community, council staff and panel members, the operation of council staff and panel members, the operation of the Randwick Local Planning Panel has been reviewed and amended to address the public health requirements and meet our statutory obligations. Randwick Local Planning Panel will be holding its meetings remotely using conferencing technology until further notice. Members of the public and applicants have been invited to listen and/or address the panel via teleconference. The panel has individually undertaken inspections for all items from the street and surrounding area. We have been provided with an assessment report prepared by the council staff, who have also briefed the panel on each application via video conference. Today we have a number of people registered to speak. The order of speakers for each item will be firstly councillors, objectors, and then those supporting the application, including the applicant or their representative. One speaker per property will be given 3 minutes. Any extension of time will be at my discretion as chair. The panel has been provided with copies of all the submissions received in response to the public exhibition of the application.
Melanie Noden,
and
29 Division Street.
Is now joining.
And forwarded a copy of late correspondence. Therefore, there is no need for speakers to repeat all the points made in those submissions or made by previous speakers. Please focus on the key points you wish us to understand and consider. The applicant may wish to address issues raised in the council's report, including the response to conditions and the issues raised by an objector. We may ask questions of the speakers to clarify our understanding of what is being said. We expect that each speaker will be heard in silence and that while they are addressing the panel, and that courtesy and respect will be observed throughout the teleconference. I ask that everyone mutes their microphones unless they are called on to speak, noting that we have the ability to mute all attendees or individuals. After hearing from the speakers on all the items, the public meeting will be closed and the panel will then deliberate and make our decision. The minutes of the panel's decision, including our reasons,
is now joining,
will be available on Council's website as soon as possible after the public meeting. You should be aware that the panel meetings are recorded and audio recordings will be uploaded to Council's website. Each member of the panel has been asked prior to the meeting to advise whether they have a conflict of interest to declare in relation to any items on the agenda. Julie Savitt-Ward has declared a conflict with item 27 of 20 for 37 to 39 Ray Street, Randwick, and she will take no part in this matter. No other conflicts of interest have been declared. So we'll start the meeting. The first item on the agenda is item, Ms. Savitt-Ward will now lead the meeting, and the first item is D2720, 37 to 39 Ray Street, Randwick, and we have two speakers for the proposal, Michael Cornealis and Mr. Andrew Martin. Are you speaking separately, like you're both representing the applicant, I presume?
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. Yeah, Andrew Martin, Town Planner for the applicant. I'll be speaking unless we need Mr. Michael to fill in any blanks. So okay. I'd just like to speak to the matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, in relation to this matter, we've raised a couple of issues for the panel to consider in terms of the relevance as it relates to this application of certain conditions, which I'll go to. I'll just articulate just some of the works that are yet to be constructed, and they've shown in the actual pictures which are in or the photographs which are in the business paper. But essentially it relates to the north elevation, upper level, 2 windows which are shown on page 4 of the business paper. East elevation, replace the fire stair and the fire door, so that's a like-for-like replacement. with a new stair and a fire door in that elevation. In the west, where simply relates to level 1 window. So there's 3 elevations that are affected in terms of just changes to the windows. 2 windows in the north, 1 window in the west, and the east is the fire door and the fire stair. Overall, there's painting to be completed. As you can see, it's not painted. There's guttering and downpipes to be removed. There's also granite paving to be applicated, and there's the gates which are to be installed. In relation to the conditions, we are suggesting, so I'll just get them out there, then the panel can decide whether they're relevant to this application as made in those works. Bearing in mind the works that we're yet to be granted approval for and those conditions. Number 10 well, don't say it's in dispute, we want it deleted. 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 21, 22, and 36, we say that are not necessarily required for this application. So that's something for the panel to consider. In relation to 2B, which relating to the gates, we have sent through a detail of the actual wrought iron gate that we wish to install. There's a picture of that was emailed. I'm not sure if the council have received that as yet, but there was an email sent yesterday. If that's reached you, I'm not sure, but we're asking for 2B to be deleted because the detail is provided in an email that we sent yesterday. So we just ask you to consider that if you are in receipt of that design for the wrought iron gates. In relation to 2A, we've also sent through a plan that deals with 2A and a revised condition of consent. And we've put forward some suggested wording that relates to an amended plan that requires a planter box to be installed around the perimeter of that raised concrete section, which can be conditioned, and there's a landscape plan requirement that still gets kept with condition 2A. So just to recap, 2A to be redrafted or reworded to pick up the amended plan that deals with 2A for a different solution to that requirement of jackhammering up the concrete, and basically have a planter box put in its place. Keep the landscape plan in 2A. 2B, we're asking to be deleted because we've provided that email with the detail of the wrought iron gates. So 2B deleted. And those conditions that we spoke to, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 21, 22, and 36. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Just checking if there's any questions. I've got a few questions. Can you just, we found it hard to actually understand from the drawings what is new work and what is actually work that has been already undertaken. Specifically the drawings, the site plan and the drawings WD01, 02, 03, 04 and 05. I think we've actually been sent some more drawings prior to the meeting, which I haven't had a chance to look at yet. But it's just that clearly we can only consider as part of the application the works that haven't actually already been undertaken. So do you want to just elaborate on that?
Yes, I could hopefully provide some clarity on that. In terms of the plans WD01 to WD05, the colouring was used to distinguish between yellow is works that have been completed and green is works yet to be completed. There is one potential sort of, I guess the person who prepared these tried to rub out the yellow, but if you go to the northern elevation on WD05, there's 2 windows at that level which have not been installed. And if you recall, on page 4 of the business paper, there's a photograph of that elevation which shows some timber boarding. So there's actually 2 windows in the northern elevation, and the green notation above the windows states that the existing windows removed and awaiting installation of new windows. So the only anomaly really is the green should be applied to those 2 windows in the northern elevation that are centrally located at level 1. In terms of the overall
Eva
work,
Stepankova.
Is now joining.
Keep going, sorry.
yeah, sorry. In relation to the other works that have yet to be completed in green, we're looking at the gates, as I mentioned, which are the front gates, double gates, and the gates to the street. There's 3 sets of gates. There's painting, has yet to be completed. Removal of plumbing stacks, which is notated in green on WD05 and also coloured on WD05 on the walls. It actually says removal existing plumbing and waste stacks from outside walls and make good to existing render and paint. So you're looking so far at the 2 windows at the level 1 in the northern elevation. Then and plus the removal of the plumbing stacks, as I mentioned. Then if you move to the southern eastern elevation on WD05, we're looking at replacement of a fire door and the fire stairs, and details have been provided of the fire stairs. So that's all that happens on the eastern elevation on WD05. The other works are completed because they're in yellow. In relation to other matters, I think if you then revert to the site plan, WD02, we're looking at a granite mid-grey 600 by 400 tile to be provided to the concreted area as part of the works, and the rest of the works have been completed. So yeah, just to recap, it's the gates, to remove the plumbing stacks, the painting, external painting, the granite paving, northern elevation 2 windows at the upper level, eastern elevation replacement of the fire stair and the fire door, and the western elevation level 1 window to be replaced. And I think that covers all the works yet to be completed, which is the green colouring.
All right, so the Trescon drawings that are included at the moment in condition 1, they're of no relevance to our approval.
Michael Stormer.
Is now exiting.
No, I believe these plans would overtake those original Trescon plans, because these were the plans that were updated to reflect, to make it clearer as to what works were proposed and what were already completed on the set of plans.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the panel members?
No, Annalise.
Not for me, thank you.
All right, thank you. So we'll now adjourn this matter and we'll go to item 2, 2820-23 Belmore Road, Randwick. And we have Councillor Kathy Nielsen speaking, if you're there. And we'll ask, we'll just check that Julie Sabat-Ward has been able to rejoin the meeting.
Shall I start speaking, Chair?
No, we're just
Spiro Maguiros.
just checking
Is
about
now exiting.
Julie Sabat-Ward. She had to leave the meeting for the first item as she had a conflict, so we're just waiting for her to rejoin.
Yes.
I have rejoined. Thank you, Annalise.
Thank you, Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you, Chair and panel. I just want to let you know that I agree with the recommendation for refusal as clearly stated and set out on page 39 of the business paper. The key issues associated with the proposal relate to non-compliant building height, FSR, motorcycle parking, incompatibility with the character of the local area and the impacts upon the heritage significance of the conservation area, and poor residential amenities. So I urge the panel to refuse the application in its current form. Thank you.
Thank you. And on behalf of the applicant, we have Ms. Genevieve Slattery.
Yes, good morning, Chair.
Good morning.
I also have Georgios from Jackson Tees Architecture who's here, just if there are any questions in terms of design. But I'll quickly give my submission if that's acceptable.
Thank you.
So I'm the town planning consultant for this DA, which, as you know, is for substantial alterations and additions to the existing building on the site. The proposal retains the front 2 stories of the building, including a restaurant, and has a new boarding house facility at the rear with parking. As you would see from the report before you, the site is very highly constrained. It has a 6.13 metre frontage to Belmore Road. And as the councillor pointed out, it's in a heritage conservation area. It's not a heritage item, but it is a contributory element under the DCP. At the outset, and in collaboration with Jackson Tees and the applicant, we made approaches to both neighbouring property owners to the north and south with a view to amalgamating. Unfortunately, the process was not successful, and on that basis, the DA relates to the site on its own. I note that the adjoining property to the north has subsequently lodged its own DA for alterations and additions and conversion to a hotel with a laundromat facility also. Notwithstanding, since the DA was lodged in June 2019, we've worked closely with the council staff and design panel, and following a number of meetings and in response to issues raised, we submitted amended plans in November last year. Unfortunately, once the plans were submitted, we were made aware of Council's strategic vision for the Randwick Junction Town Centre, which is still yet to be made public. But as a consequence of Council's work, we were advised that the number of stories wasn't supported and that the site should be amalgamated to allow for extra parking. And as the panel would be aware, the parking control in the affordable housing sector is not a development standard. Notwithstanding, on the receipt of this advice from Council, the applicant advised Council that they were willing to amend the DA to reduce the number of stories, which would eliminate any non-compliances in terms of height and FSR. Obviously, the potential for amalgamation had been fully explored previously. Unfortunately, we weren't permitted to submit any further amendments, and so the DA report before you is prepared on the basis of the original June 19 plans. In our view, there's ample opportunity to amend the proposal to address the design and amenity issues in the Council's report. In terms of parking, the site is like
+614351755716
Is now joining.
In terms of parking, as you'd be aware, the site is located within the town centre. There's a bus stop at the front of the site, other bus stops on Allison Road, and it's also close to light rail stops on High Street and Wannsee Road. It's ideally located and suited to the proposed mix in our view, and the rear of the site can easily accommodate a car parking space, a loading bay, or a mix of motorcycle and bicycle parking.
I'll just interrupt you because you're going over time. So
Sure.
Do you need an extension?
20 seconds.
Fine.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So as I said, we believe there's scope to achieve compliance with the height and FSR controls. We can increase the floor to ceiling heights and the building separation to achieve the additional internal amenity and to reduce the overshadowing impacts to the south. And these changes will have obvious flow-on impacts in terms of improving the streetscape and heritage issues. So on that basis, we'd be requesting today that the panel defers determination of the DA so that we can submit amended plans which address the concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. So just on that, you're actually formally requesting a deferral, and you would be looking at, if we were to grant that deferral, it would be on, you'd be looking at reducing, taking off what the top floor on both sections of the building, is that?
Definitely the front, and yeah, most likely the rear as well. I think there's scope, and Georgios might need to jump in just because he's the architect, but I think there's scope to maintain that communal lounge room at the front in the original part of the building, and that was located there intentionally so that it would have the least intrusive impacts in terms of the original building that was being retained. And opportunities for a communal open space above that, so that would all sit within the height plane, and then increasing the separation between the two forms and possibly taking off one of the levels at the rear. Obviously, we haven't prepared any plans, but we think that it's easily achievable.
And you're saying that those changes would largely address the concerns about height, floor space ratio, and the amenity of the boarding rooms?
That's right. So in terms of floor space, I think we're 67 square metres over. So we'd be coming down to achieve compliance with that standard. The height, again, would comply. And by increasing the separation between the two forms, obviously you improve the opportunities for light and ventilation, and also reduce the impacts to the property to the south, which was one of the council's concerns.
And would those rooms actually get a bit larger? Because I think one of the concerns was just they would get larger.
Yep.
And the time that you would need to do anything, this changes?
I think probably around 4 weeks, I would suggest.
And what's the rationale for having that as a preferred option, as opposed to if the panel were to refuse it and it would then be a review application?
It's purely because our client, he's a small business owner. This is pretty much his sole source of income. He's lost rent from the downstairs restaurant during this corona period, and he's been working on this DA for more than a year now, and he'd just like to have the opportunity to address the concerns, which unfortunately he feels like he wasn't afforded as part of that DA process.
All right. So panel members, do you have any questions?
Sorry, I can't hear.
No, Annalise.
Yes, I have a question, if I may.
Yeah.
Miss Slattery, why is...
5175716
Is now exiting.
Miss Slattery, you mentioned you weren't permitted to submit amended plans. Why is this? Because I believe council indicated their key concerns somewhat earlier in the process.
We did submit amended plans in November. Once we submitted those plans, council's feedback to us was that they had consistently applied the affordable housing car parking rates throughout the LGA, and they wouldn't be supporting a non-compliance in terms of car parking of the extent that this DA was proposing. And they also have strategic visions for the town centre, which we weren't able to be made aware of what they are. But their view was that the site should be amalgamated to provide additional parking, and on that basis they weren't willing to accept the amended plans.
Okay. So, but did your amended plans address the issues that they raised with you earlier on?
We were marginally over the height still, but it was set back further. We provided some communal space at the front above that communal room so that the streetscape impacts were lessened. But there was still a height non-compliance. There's no avoiding that. In terms of parking, we agreed with the engineers to provide a single car parking space at the rear, and that could be used by either the manager of the boarding house or deliveries associated with the restaurant, one or the other. And in terms of amenity, the amenity did improve. We made some adjustments to the layout of the rooms themselves. But no, they didn't agree. They didn't address all of the issues. We'd need to be making some further changes in the design that I'm hoping to bring to the panel if you're kind enough to defer the DA.
So did the number or size of the boarding rooms change?
They did. Some of the rooms, I think from memory, we lost one room from memory. Sorry, I don't have those drawings with me, but we did, and we provided some further solar modelling which showed the improvements.
Okay, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll just ask council staff, Mr. Coe, what would council's response be to the deferring of the application, and as outlined, would that be would those changes go some way to addressing council's concerns?
Yes, Chair. Look, in council's opinions, it's more to do with the amenity of the actual development. At this stage, I'm until we see the plans, but on based on what Ms. Genevieve Slattery's described, I'm a bit reluctant to and a bit hesitant to accept those changes and understand those would then address the bulk of the concerns.
Thank you. So if there's no more questions, that's that item. The next item is
Michael Stormer.
Is now joining.
2920 76 Brim Street, Coogee. And we have one objector, Mr. Les Hill, if you're there.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Chair and panel, for your time. I will endeavour to keep this brief. I am the representative for all owner-occupiers of 117 and 119 Dolphin Street in Coogee. Our building strongly opposes the building of balconies at 76 Brim Street in Coogee. Now, we understand the desire to improve property for a variety of reasons, and under most circumstances, we would not seek to impede this. However, we've been a part of this community in this building for about 7 years, and in that time, we've had a great deal of experience with noise from surrounding properties, 115 Dolphin, 78 Brim, 80 Brim, and other properties that we can't quite work out where the noise is coming from. Now, these noise issues have predominantly been from the use of outside areas. The main bedrooms on our property and from other properties in the area that I visited are all at the back of the building, facing the hard surfaces of concrete and masonry on all the properties around us. Now, needless to say, these hard surfaces amplify any noise. Normal conversations, let alone music, etc., have made sleeping quite difficult. Now, we also understand that we live in a densely populated community and that absolute quiet is not only unreasonable to accept, but not fair on the people in the community, us included. But it's our belief that people should be able to sleep during what I'll call standard sleeping hours, the majority of the time without being disturbed. Now, I know this is not a debate, I'd like to engage in one, and I appreciate you taking the time to hear our concerns. Now, again, the owners at 119 Dolphin Street strongly oppose the addition of balconies at 76 Brim Street. However, should this development go ahead as proposed, we would ask that the bylaws of the building be adjusted to ensure that there is a reasonable and imposable curfew for the use of outdoor space, the same as we've had built into our bylaws. Sunday to Thursday is 10 p.m. and Friday and Saturday is midnight seem to work well. This would no doubt save a lot of unnecessary back and forth communication to council, police, etc., and create a more livable community for the immediate surrounding area. Thank you again. I have nothing else to say.
Thank you. So just in relation to your bylaws, were they, was that a requirement of a condition of approval, or is that something that the strata just changed?
It's something that we've put in place for the people in our building and the buildings around us. And I'm probably sure you're aware that 115 Dolphin Street was a boarding house until it burnt down in the fires. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the building, but it was a constant source of noise, and it was pretty much a living hell for quite some time there. It is very loud out the back. And
is now exiting.
The bedrooms, as I said, are right at the back of the building, and it's, even just a simple conversation makes it incredibly hard to sleep at night time. And I'm not a wowser. I expect people to have a good time. It's a wonderful community, but when you can't sleep, it becomes a bit of a thorn in your side.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the panel members?
Yes, if I may, Mr. Hill, can you just please repeat the hours that was associated with your bylaws?
Well, we have 10 p.m. Sunday to Thursday.
Michael Stormer.
And
is now exiting.
And midnight on Fridays and Saturday nights, which we think is reasonable for for people to still enjoy themselves and be respectful of the people around them.
Thank you. And you said something to do with other neighbouring properties as well, that they had this bylaw as well. Is that correct?
No, I said that I know a few of the neighbours. Been here a long time, and I've been to their properties, and their bedrooms all back onto what is. When we look at our back window, we can see the other apartments, and they all have concrete areas out the back, and obviously they're all majority of masonry. So I'm saying that the majority, well, all the buildings that I visited, and our building, all the main bedrooms back onto the space where these balconies would be.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Could I raise, sorry, my name's Rebecca. I also live in the block.
Sorry, are you registered to speak?
No, but Les is, and we're in the same building. And I'd just like to say...
And do you have anything, sorry, I'll just have to interrupt you because there are processes where people have to register to speak. And so if you haven't registered to speak, then you're not someone that can sort of just butt in and speak because there has to be order. So is there anything that you want to raise that has not been raised by Mr. Hill? Like if it's about noise, we've heard about noise. So it'd have to be on a totally different issue.
Yes. It doesn't fit with the character of the street or the backyards. There aren't any balconies in this area, and it sets a really poor precedent for any potential knockdown rebuilding works in the future that could also affect the enjoyment and the character of this rear corridor.
All right, thank you. And what was your name? Your name again, for the record?
My name is Rebecca, and I'm from the same building as Les, as an owner-occupier.
Sorry, what was your surname?
Wilkinson.
Wilkinson. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, now, and we have now Mr. Thomas Hardwick, who's the owner, if you're there.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I appear today as the owner of the property. I have reviewed the recommendations in the minutes that have been put to the panel and didn't have anything to add to that. I was really here to answer any questions or provide information the panel may have. In light of the objections that have just been raised, which up until now I haven't seen a copy of, I would just make a couple of comments. I've owned the property since about 2017, and not once have I or my managing agent received a noise complaint from any of the tenants in the property or from any of the adjoining neighbours. It's not a backpackers. The place that burnt down seemed to be working on backpackers. This is a place where people rent long-term accommodation. I would say that the property next door to me, which is I think 74 Bream Street, does in fact have balconies on the back deck. So for the lady who appeared unannounced, I don't actually agree with that. And I think council also addressed the issue of noise in its report and found that what we were proposing was not inconsistent with other arrangements in the area. And I'd also would have thought that in respect of bylaws, which might be common in a strata property, this is a company title property. I'd also say that I would have thought if anyone felt there was unnecessary noise after 10 p.m. during the week or 12 midnight on the weekend, the right exists to call the police and have that noise curtailed, and most police would ordinarily do that. So that would be the few comments I'd make in respect of the complaints or objections that have just been made.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the panel members?
No questions.
Not from me. Thank you.
Thank you.
None from me either.
Thank you. So we'll move on to D30 of 20. There are no speakers for this item registered to speak. So then the next item is D3120, which relates to 26 Abbott Street, Coogee. And we have speaking against the proposal, Councillor Kathy Nielsen.
Thank you very much, Chair and panel. I should say I support the amended plans for the alterations and additions to the existing flat building as recommended by the council officer. When we compare the original proposed southern elevation on page 190 of the business paper, and then you compare the southern elevation on page 191, of course, ignoring the studio above the garages, and taking into account the further amendments proposed in the report of the design, it contributes much more favourably to the neighbourhood. And these changes are set out clearly in condition 2 on page 256 of the business paper, namely that Studio 5 above the existing detached garage, including the associated staircase, shall be deleted, and the roof of the existing garage shall be retained, all good points. And point C, the second floor north-facing balcony off bedroom 1 of apartment 3 shall be deleted, and the sliding doors replaced with a highlight window, etc. And point E, the seating and communal facilities shall be provided within the communal open space. So basically, I support the adaptive reuse of the existing flat building subject to the above conditions and any additional conditions that further enhance the design, both inside for the future occupants and outside for the positive contribution to the neighbourhood. Thank you, Chair and panel.
Thank you. Any questions from the panel members? No. Thank you. So the next speaker is Mr. Stuart Harding on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm talking to a PowerPoint presentation, which I hope I was understood that Mr. Coe was going to look after. Is that the case?
Yes, Mr. Coe,
Yes,
have you got the PowerPoint?
I will give me a second. Loading it up now.
Thank you.
I'm happy to start at slide 2, Mr. Coe.
Yep, go for it.
I haven't seen it on my screen yet, so I don't know if the panel...
No, it hasn't come up. It's coming up now.
Great.
All
Thank
right.
you. So
Thank you.
slide 2. So I guess the reason I wanted to start on slide 2, and it goes to a bit of the conversation the councillor just had, is that this slide highlights that the area over the existing garage is a bit of an anomaly in the streetscape. And to that extent, we're talking to condition 2 of the proposed approval. We're not obviously opposed to getting the development consent, but condition 2A requires the deletion of the studio over the garages. And what I'm going to try and demonstrate to you now is that the studio above the garage contributes meaningfully to the streetscape in terms of urban design and also in terms of certain outcomes of surveillance of the street and the like. If you go to slide 2, please, Mr. Coe. Over a number of months, we negotiated with council a variety of changes to the application. This was one of the earlier designs over the garage that we thought was a good, solid solution in terms of design. It was something that had a roof-type material over the top of the garage. It had good windows to the street and a little bit of a balcony area to provide that surveillance. If you go to the next slide, please. This second slide is the scheme that we finally submitted to council and had understood that we were had addressed all of the outstanding issues. We were somewhat taken by surprise by the end result where the condition required deletion of this, and hence why I'm talking to that tonight or today. So just very quickly, Mr. Coe, the slides that I've also prepared show the character of the area. So the next couple of slides, these are adjacent or nearby in Mount Street, part of the visual catchment. Next one, please. These are also in Mount Street. The picture on the left is the immediately adjoining property with some development above a garage. Next slide, please. More critically, these dwellings or residential flat buildings in the photo on the left and appearing on the photo on the right are the 3-storey structure adjacent to the garage, which we say also defines a character that makes our scheme acceptable. Next slide, please.
So, Mr. Harden, you're going to need an extension. So how long do you think you'll need?
I'm about to wrap up, actually.
Okay.
So these, I'll take the 1 minute extension. My
Yes.
counter only had a couple of minutes gone, but anyway. So these are also RFBs in Abbott Street that are part of the visual catchment of the site. So going to the last slide, I think it's important to note that we had no objections other than the councillor's comment earlier. There's no adjoining properties that objected to this development, and particularly the property at number 24 didn't. We thought we had resolved a scheme fairly well that Mr. Coe and Mr. Jones, through negotiations over several months, and therefore were taken a bit by surprise by the deletion of the Studio 5 in the condition. We're asking, or are asking, that it either 2A be deleted so that Studio 5 remains as finally resolved, but ideally we think the better urban design outcome is the scheme that I showed you in the earlier slides of 19 September last year, which has more of an angled roof form and materials that accompany the other materials used in the main building. This is a fantastic example of rejuvenation of an existing building and an opportunity to provide affordable housing in accordance with the SEP. And we say it kicks all of those goals in terms of those objectives and warrants support of this little bit of infill over the garages. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Panel members, any questions?
No questions.
Not from me. Thank you.
And none from me either. Thank you.
I thank you all for listening.
Thank you. So that concludes that item. The next item is D32 of 20. It's 39 to 47 St Paul's Street, Randwick. Again, we have Councillor Nielsen speaking first.
Thank you very much, Chair and Panel. I support the recommendation for refusal. And as commented in the business paper on page 280, although the additions are located to the rear of the heritage item, it's considered that the extent of the additions and lack of rear setback to the first floor, only 1 metre proposed, will result in adverse visual amenity impacts from the northern neighbouring property, Brigidine College. And then page 284 talks about addressing these issues, which would go some way in mitigating the non-compliances. For example, concerns with the minimal ground floor rear setback and the nil first floor rear setback that will result in adverse visual amenity impacts and not reflective of the character of other development in the laneway, and concerns that the rear setback will remove 3 approved car parking spaces. So requesting that the rear setback be increased to a minimum of 3 metres to reduce the bulk and scale and to retain the parking spaces with subsequent reduction in seats, which would be to the detriment perhaps of the applicant's proposal. But it would reduce the extent of the car parking variation, would also ameliorate the concerns in terms of the rear setback that affect St Brigidine College and St Basil's. And I think when you look at the illustrations on pages 297 and 298, they clearly illustrate in
Unknown
pictorial
participant
form
is now exiting.
the impacts of the lack of appropriate setbacks. So I urge the panel to refuse the application in its current form. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions? No. Next is Councillor Brendan Roberts.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you for hearing me, Chair and panel. I'm Councillor Brendan Roberts, Councillor for East Ward, where this application is coming from. I speak in support of the application. The community love the spot. We all love the spot, the dining choices that they have, and of course the Art Deco Ritz Cinema. And that anchors all the other businesses in the spot. Now, the spot is in a B1 zone, which is a commercial zone. Now, the objectives of that zone include the requirements to assist those businesses serve the needs of the people who live close by. Now, this application seeks to fulfil these objectives pretty clearly. They're doing that by providing more cinema choice for locals. They're wanting to go from 6 cinemas to 8 cinemas. They also want to make their business sustainable, especially in a post-COVID-19 environment. And frankly, by extension, that will make the spot sustainable into the future. Obviously, if we do look at these applications, they need to be done without any undue impost on the community, and that is reasonable. I feel the application that's been put forward is reasonable in that respect. So let's look at a few of the issues. First is the wall height. Now, from the rear ground level, the wall height is actually less than 12 metres, which is the standard. I believe the wall height is measured from the basement level, which makes it exceed. So that makes it a bit of a loophole. So it is actually from the ground level at the rear less than 12 metres. But more importantly, the top 1.5 metres of that rear is set back 4.5 metres. So you can't even see the top 1.5 metres from the ground. But the most important thing that I think is interesting here is that the top of the proposal is still 2.4 metres below the current wall height of the existing building. So I think the wall height in this application is reasonable. The other important issue is the floor space ratio. Now, the current existing use floor space ratio of the site, I believe, is 1.7 to 1. Now, it's 1.7 to 1, so it can fulfill its use in the B1 zone objectives, which is to provide a service to the locals. And that's a cinema service, a unique service. Now, the proposal seeks to boost the floor space ratio by only 5.8%. Now, that 5.8% increase in floor space ratio will increase the cinema choice from 6 to 8, which is 33%. So I think that's a great outcome. 5% increase on the existing use in floor space ratio gives a 33% increase for locals. So in that respect, it is reasonable. And I think if you look at it from the context of what the standard is, of which this already has an existing waiver, I think that's a little bit unfair. I think you should look at this in terms of the existing floor space ratio. Now, if you look at car parking, that is an issue.
I'll just interrupt you there, sorry. You're over time, so do you need an extension?
I do, please. Thank you,
So
Chair.
1 minute, is that enough?
That should be enough.
Yeah, okay, 1 minute.
So car parking is an issue. We can approve this application, but put in a clause where the existing patronage is not allowed to increase. So retain the current cap of 1892 customers, and therefore traffic will not be an issue. Heritage is the final thing. The front facade is not affected 1 iota. It's just the rear laneway. The Heritage Council of New South Wales and Council's own heritage officer, I believe, support the application. So frankly, heritage is not an issue as well. And that makes point 2 in the recommendations fairly redundant. It's fundamentally a benign application that has had pretty much 0 community objections. I believe 1 submission against and 1 submission for. That proves it's a benign application. So I ask you to consider the application, approve it as per the plan, but keep a cap of customers under the existing use to take care of car spaces. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the panel members? No? The next speaker is for the applicant is Mr. Patrick LeBon.
Good afternoon, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to address the panel today. My name is Patrick LeBon and I'm a Director at Milestone Town Planning. Joining me on the call is my co-director, Lisabella Esposito, who has also been closely involved with this DA. Together we have a combined experience of over 40 years. I request the panel permits 3 speakers today, the landowner, Mr. Eddie Tamir, and the project traffic engineer, Joshua Hollis. Our heritage consultant, Jennifer Hill, is also on the line, is able to answer any questions or queries of the panel if required. With your permission, I will ask that Eddie Tamir addresses the panel first.
That's fine. I just want to reiterate, though, that we would not expect there to be any repetition in what's being said, given that you've got 3 speakers.
Understood. Yeah, understood.
Michael Stormel.
Is now joining.
So, Mr. Tamir, if you're there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening and giving your time. My name is Eddie Tamir. My family has owned and operated cinemas for the last 23 years. The Classic in Elsternwick, Lido in Hawthorne, Cameo in Belgrave, all in Melbourne. All 3 are historic cinema buildings that were closed down, bankrupted, and forgotten to history. We resurrected them, added more screens with exciting contemporary design while being respectful to any significant historic features. We kept the original cinema names according to our imperative to maintain community connection in a world-class environment. We bought the Ritz.
Jenny Saliba.
12
Is now exiting.
We bought the Ritz Cinemas 12 months ago. It is a grand old cinema that has had no money or innovation invested in it for over 20 years. It is in a shabby state. It requires a total overhaul to give it any chance of surviving and thriving into the future. All internal spaces require renovation and cohesive design, adding some fresh pizzazz and circus. We have a 30s surrealism for all the non-heritage spaces in mind, while highlighting all original deco features. It requires an additional 2 cinema screens as per the proposal before you for cinemas 7 and 8. The proposed 8 screens is the absolute minimum requirement to be competitive in the current landscape. Additional screens enable a compelling range of films. The Ritz plays films big and small, old and new, celluloid and digital. It has the opportunity to be the cinema cultural hub of Sydney. Major multinational cinemas in the area have 15 to 20 screens. Let's not forget the competition from the big Netflix gorilla in the room, with thousands of films on offer. The Ritz serves the local community, yes, but it is much bigger than just that. It is a Sydney icon, if not a national one. Home of many film festivals, including Sydney Film Festival. It hosts major Australian premieres with world-class talent, such as Renee Zellweger and Timothée Chalamet just last year. If the cinema is not brought up to world-class competitive standard, it is in danger of becoming a white elephant, the cinema that everyone talks about fondly, but never visits. Keep in mind the list of great Sydney cinema houses that have closed, to name a few. Valhalla Glebe, Roxy Parramatta, Academy Twin Paddington, Metro Potts Point, and the recently announced shock that Event Cinemas in George Street is soon to follow and be closed. It's a precarious time for many businesses, including cinemas.
Just interrupt you there. You're going over time, so have you nearly finished?
1 minute, please, and I'll be done.
Yeah, well, given that there's two other speakers speaking,
is now exiting.
And the point you're making is generally that the cinema is needed, whereas we're really dealing with much more the impacts of the proposal on the environment. So can you please wrap it up more briefly than that?
I'll get to that point, and I will absolutely wrap it up.
Thank you.
The rejuvenation of the Ritz is a great opportunity for the council and the local community. I'm hopeful you can put in perspective and request your support to approve the DA. We have an iconic cinema serving the local community. It is currently a subpar offer. The proposal gives it a chance to survive. 2 additional cinemas to be built in a dead-end lane that offers nothing except for a home for garbage bins and rubbish. There has been no objections to the proposal from anyone. The proposal does not impact a millimetre of heritage fabric. The size of the cinema 7 and 8 have been reduced to the minimal size to still be viable. Cinema rooms need to provide cinematic experience better than your lounge room. Setting the cinemas back any further into the existing building would require tearing into the significant heritage fabric listed in Cinema 1. The new building to be constructed on commercially zoned land results in visual impacts to neighbours of no consequence. The increase in seat numbers is only 40 seats above the approved council seating capacity. Increased traffic is a non-issue, as we are prepared to operate under a cap that prohibits us from selling any more tickets than our current capacity. Our Lido and Classic Cinemas in Melbourne operate successfully under these caps and have allowed us to increase our screen numbers and trade profitably. The simple imperative of supporting local...
Okay, I'll have to wind you up there. You're going over your extension and you are essentially repeating what you've already said. So is there any final point you wish to make?
No, thank you. But thanks for listening, and we hope the panel considers our proposal favourably and see it as critical to the Ritz survival with no downside to the community.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions from the panel members?
Yes, Tom McConnell
is now joining.
No questions?
Not from me.
Okay.
Thank you. So, Mr. Le Bon, did you want to go next?
Actually, I would request that Joshua Hollis, the traffic engineer, just has a quick word in regards to the car parking issues raised by council.
Mr. Hollis.
Thank you, Madam Chair and panel members. As everyone's aware, the outdoor cinema has been approved for an increase of 77 seats, and this application would increase that by 40 seats.
Sorry, I'll just interrupt you there because the increase of 77 that you're referring to was done on a temporary basis. It was not done on a permanent basis. So I just want you to be aware of that's how the panel that approved that increase viewed that application, and 3 of the current members were actually members of the panel that were on that determined that application.
Yes, we're aware that that's a temporary approval. Correct. I'll cut straight to the key point, which I think underlies some of the main recommendation in terms of car parking for this application, and that is that there appears to be an issue about whether it's appropriate for customers of the cinema to park in the adjacent public car park. Now, I think it's entirely appropriate for cinema customers to use that car park, and that's one of the reasons that the car park is there, particularly as the busy times for the cinema coincide with times that car park is otherwise pretty quiet and has a lot of spare capacity. And of course, the operators of both the cinema and the car park encourage cinema customers to use that car park and park there. It's advertised for use on the car park website, and the cinema subsidises parking for its customers by a flat rate parking charge. So there's not an issue in parking terms with the capacity of parking in the area. The question just seems to be the appropriateness of whether cinema customers should be using that adjacent public car park, and we say that that's exactly what it should be used for. And so the increase, whether you look at it as a marginal increase of 40 seats on top of the approved outdoor cinema, or 117 seats as a standalone application, is neither here nor there in terms of parking effects. So, but as my client has already pointed out, that could be, if that 40 seat difference was the critical point that was a critical point which was being crossed in terms of the parking implications of this application, then the number of seats could be limited to that which has already been approved, albeit temporarily, to that 77 seat number.
Thank you. Any questions from the panel members?
Yes, I have questions if I may start.
Yes, thank you.
So first of all, wanted to clarify the seat numbers as it seems to be moving around quite a lot. The assessment report before us indicates a proposed 122 new seats, disregarding the 77 for the moment that is part of the outdoor cinema. I understood it was an application for 122 new seats, but the applicant is referring to 117 seats. Can the applicant please clarify?
Yes, that's correct. The application proposes 117 additional seats.
So our report says 122 seats. Chair, can we clarify that, please, with council?
So, Mr. Le Bon, could you just say what your understanding of the existing number of approved seats, not without the 77 temporary, is that I think 1810? Is that
1815? So yeah, so the approved seating capacity in terms of permanent seats inside the building is 1,815 seats. I believe the discrepancy may have come from the council officer's report referring to the 1,810 rather than 1,815. So I believe that's where the discrepancy has arisen.
Okay. So when you say that's the approved capacity, is that actually a number that's in the conditions of approval, or is that the number of seats you can count that are there?
That's referred in the consent, modification consent that was issued by council in the 90s. So we've got a reference to that, and that's actually been written by council on a consent notice. Okay.
And then the number that you're seeking is, what's that number?
Yeah, so the additional seats is 117 additional seats on top of the 1,815, which is the approved capacity inside the building.
And what's the total? Just so I don't have to worry.
Yeah, total is 1,932.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Excellent, thank you. Now, I did have a question to do with car parking. The car, Mr. Hollis, is it? You mentioned the issue using the adjacent car park. I don't think that issue is the issue. In fact, in my reading of it, the issue is the capacity, particularly at peak times, that the car park is able to accommodate. You mentioned that the busy times for the cinema are not when the car park or other users have their busy times. I'm just wondering, in terms of, say, Saturday night and Sunday, do you have data on the capacity of the car park or the spare capacity of the car park and what it is extra is able to accommodate?
Yes, we undertook surveys over a number of evenings in both the car park and on surrounding streets. Surrounding streets are busy. A lot of people park there. There's not a lot of spare capacity on the surrounding streets, but there is spare capacity in the adjacent public car park. Our surveys on those evenings, Saturdays, Friday evenings, found spare capacity of between sort of 40 to 110 spaces. Most of that was in the adjacent public car park. That was on the Friday. And on the Saturday, 100 to 125 spaces. Okay,
thank you. And did you survey on a number of Friday nights and a number of Saturday nights, or just one Friday, one Saturday? And what dates were they? Were they winter or summer, or could you expand, please?
We picked one busy Friday night and one busy Saturday night where we had a couple of premieres or major screenings. That was done in close consultation.
Is now exiting.
Close consultation with the cinema operator to ensure that we were picking pretty representative evenings that were going to be busy. Those surveys were undertaken on Friday the 3rd of May and Saturday the 4th of May in 2019.
So do you have more general capacity data for Wilson's car park that is beyond just the one time that you surveyed, so that the panel can get a feeling for what the capacity generally across the year is for the car park?
No, what the way that we would normally conduct surveys for something like this is to pick what, again, in consultation with the cinema operator, what he thought pretty busy nights were going to be. And we looked at a period of probably a couple of months to determine what evenings would be appropriate to survey. If in those circumstances the data that we got was showing us, for example, that the car park was full, there was absolutely no parking, we may have then looked to do additional surveys to see whether what we were getting was representative. But because those were busy nights for the cinema and there was still plenty of spare capacity in the adjacent car park, it wouldn't normally be standard practice to be doing any extra surveys.
What I'm trying to get a hold of is the relative impact. So not just looking at nights that are busy for the cinema, but nights that are busy for the whole of the spot, and then trying to understand on nights that are busy for the whole of the spot whether there is capacity in the Wilson's car park. That's what I'm trying to understand.
It may be that I don't know whether my client has contacts with the operator of the adjacent car park, but it may be that we can ask them for some information which would answer that question.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it at that.
Any other questions of Mr. Hollis from the panel members? No?
Not from me.
Thank you.
It's not from me.
Thank you. So, Mr. LeBon?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I have one additional question.
Yes.
So the current applicant bought the cinema, I can't see the data, I think in 2017. Was that before or after the approval for the outdoor cinema?
Chair, can I answer that question? Our client purchased the site in early last year, so 2019, and then proceeded to, we lodged the DA for the outdoor cinema seating at the rear after the purchase by our client last year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask, in regards to the outdoor cinema, can I ask has it ever been used to full capacity? What are the average numbers that have used that outdoor cinema?
Is now joining.
Chair, can I divert that question to my client? He may be able to answer that question in more detail than myself.
Yes, certainly. Mr. Tamir?
Yeah. So, it was very successful, and we were generally, if it wasn't raining, we were at capacity. It was a very exciting initiative and people took to it well.
Thank you. Now, Mr. LeBon, did you have anything further you wish to add?
Yes, Chair, I've got a few matters to just go through, if I may go through it now.
Yes.
So look, we've read the council officers' report and we disagree with the assessment carried out by council officers. Our detailed written responses to the panel on the 5th of June and yesterday have addressed those matters, and obviously I'm happy to respond to any queries of the panel after my presentation. So I understand the matters that have been addressed and resolved with the council based on our submissions include, first of all, heritage. So we have agreement with the Heritage Council of New South Wales and Council's senior heritage officer that have both supported the proposal. There will be no loss of significant heritage fabric, and the integrity of the conservation area will be preserved by the proposal. Now, in terms of car parking, can I first say that in terms of the cap that we've proposed in our previous submissions, our client is actually willing and able to operate the site under the current approved internal seating capacity of 1,815. So the purpose of this DA is to improve the diversity of screens and offering in terms of the variety of screenings that can be provided to the community. It's not about increasing capacity of patrons in the sense of having more people through the doors at any one time. So we've got no issue in regards to a condition being imposed that limits the patron capacity to 1,815. So there'll be no additional car parking impacts as a result of the proposal in terms of maximum capacity. And having said that, obviously Joshua Hollis has responded to the matters raised in the report. And by imposing the capacity cap, this addresses the issue raised in Council's officer's assessment report, in that the maximum capacity will not be increased beyond what's been approved by Council previously. In terms of submissions, there were 2 submissions. One was in support and one was raising some queries in regards to the proposal. And we've obtained a copy of those submissions, and I know both the submissions were seeking clarification. The queries have been addressed in our DA submission in the final documents that we submitted. In terms of the clause 4.6, this was a matter raised in the Council Officer's report. As detailed in our late submission yesterday, Milestone has reformatted and revised the clause 4.6 written request to address the matters raised in Council Officer's report. The panel can be satisfied that the clause 4.6 written request has adequately addressed the matters required under clause 4.63 and 4.64 of the RLPP 2012. Now, given the resolution of these matters, it is understood the sole remaining environmental impact relates to visual amenity. And if I may ask the panel just to turn to the plans, if you have the drawings in front of you, to sheet number A101, which is the aerial map.
Unknown participant is now joining.
Showing the showing the site in context of the surrounding area. So one of the matters raised in the Council Officer's report regarding visual amenity was in regards to residential buildings. And I just want to make it clear, this site is in a B1 zone and doesn't adjoin any adjoining residential building. The nearest residential apartment building is 60 metres to the northwest at the corner of Aoli Street and Peruse Road. And then the St Basil's aged care facility is 55 metres to the east and is separated by a large tree canopy, which also screens the proposal. So in terms of impacts on these residential uses, in our view, it's quite minimal, and there will be no adverse impact in terms of visual bulk amenity on those particular uses. It's also worth noting that the adjoining building immediately to the east at 49 to 55 St Paul Street is a large car park building. And as you can see in the aerial map, it's a massive site of almost larger proportions than our own site. Oh, thank you, Mr. Coe. So in that context, the addition that we're proposing is quite minimal in regards to the existing built form context to the rear, which is the critical context, not St Paul Street and not the heritage context in terms of Peruse Street or Peruse Road. So before
I'll have to interrupt you there because you are going over time. So have you nearly finished? Or?
Yeah, if I could have 1 more minute, Chair, I can wrap it up.
Yes, okay, 1 minute.
Thank you. So before submitting the revised DA in April this year, in response to Council Officer's request for information, Milestone visited the Bridgetine School, including the school grounds and the staff room building, which is the immediately opposite the site to the north. And so that building is a staff room, as noted in our submission, and the impact from this building will be quite minimal and has been addressed in terms of visual bulk impacts when viewing the site from Aoli Lane by providing a 7 to 8.4 metre building separation from that staff room. So in terms of the proposal, it's not uncommon for a cinema building to occupy the entire site in terms of the needs of the use to provide for seating and cinema screens. And certainly in regards to the built form of the building, it has to be of a certain height, obviously to cater for the screen, and has minimal openings. And it's worth noting in conclusion in regards to the amenity impacts, the site is within a B1 neighbourhood centre zone and is completely appropriate development for the site in this commercial context. And the proposal is an appropriate design response to the rear lane, which is essentially a service lane servicing the rear of the shops that front onto Peruse Road. To close, Milestone has undertaken a comprehensive environmental assessment and provided a response to all the matters raised in Council Officer's report. And we are still of the firm view that the DA is acceptable on planning, design and heritage grounds and result in overall minimal environmental impacts, sitting comfortably in a laneway streetscape and results in totally appropriate building footprint and scale suitable for the site's cinema use and B1 zoning. The positive social and flow-on economic effects or benefits are also noted for the locality. So the panel has all necessary information to issue a determination to approve the DA, to include council's standard conditions of consent and the cap on capacity as noted previously at 1,815 patrons to address the matters that have been raised. We respectfully request the panel support to approve the DA.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the panel members?
Not from me.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
So, Mr. Tamir, yes, it is. Probably, sorry, no, Mr. Lebon. It is a bit cheeky, including the 77 in your numbers, given that they are temporary seats. I see you doing that. So, are you saying to us that you are in fact asking for an increase of 17 seats, but you would limit the capacity of the use? So you would have 40 less patrons using those using it at any point in time. Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying that you design changes to limit the number of seats by 40?
No. So what we're suggesting in regards to the capacity cap is that we would build the additional 117 seats as proposed, and that there would be a cap imposed in terms of the number of sales that could, tickets that could be sold on the actual cinema. So that would be an integrated ticketing system that would prevent our client obviously selling additional tickets beyond that cap of 1,815. Again, I reiterate the purpose of the DA is to provide a diversity of screens and to broaden the ability of our client to host a number of different additional cinema and films throughout the day and evening. So it's not about just bulk increases in seating capacity. It is about that diversity of screening capacity and capability.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
So just on that, Cinema 8 is the one that projects the most into the laneway, so it's only got a setback of 1 metre from the boundary. So in terms of providing diversity, why does Cinema 8 need to be that much bigger than Cinema 7?
In terms of the actual, in terms of the size, or are you referring to the capacity?
Well, the capacity I think is more as well. It's bigger than Cinema 7, and it also then projects further. Is there any reason that Cinema 8 needs to be that big, or could it actually be set back the same distance as Cinema 7?
Well, I might defer to my client, but my understanding is it is dictated by the size of the screen itself, which forms the spatial and seating arrangement. But Mr. Tamir might be able to answer that.
All right, Mr. Tamir, can you answer that?
Yep. The Cinema 7 is not an ideal size. We've actually set that back a couple of metres in order for us to achieve the fire exit requirements from all the existing cinemas plus Cinema 7 and 8, and that's why it is reduced. And Cinema 8 is what we call closer to an ideal size. In fact, we originally had it to the boundary and we did pull it back a metre. And as I mentioned, we still want to provide a cinematic experience as best we can. And Cinema 7 is very compromised and nowhere near ideal. And Cinema 8 is closer to what we would see as an excellent viewing and cinematic experience.
And Cinema 6 seems to be quite small, or you've actually made it for smaller.
Yep.
So there wasn't scope to actually keep it as a larger one, so that you didn't have to extend as much for Cinema 8.
Yes. So we cut back Cinema 6 again, not ideal, but that was the only way we could achieve accessing Cinema 7 and 8 without touching the heritage fabric. So we could have perhaps, found a way to affect the heritage fabric and reduce Cinema 1's seating capacity, but we weren't able. We chose not to do that for the sake of heritage, for keeping the heritage fabric intact, which we care about too.
All right, thank you. Any further questions from the panel members? No. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So this item will be dealt with in our deliberations after the meeting. The final item on the agenda is D33 of 20, 35 Division Street, Coogee. Again, we have Councillor Nielsen speaking.
Thank you, panel. I just want to say that I totally support the recommendation for refusal. I'm
is now exiting.
Applicant could believe it could be approved. The officer's recommendation on page 327 gives very extensive grounds for refusal, and I urge you to adopt the officer's report. Thank you, panel.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kim Dalton. Sorry, Mr. Dalton, you're on mute. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that.
Yep, that's fine.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address the panel, and I'm speaking on behalf of Penny Robbins and myself, owner-occupiers of 41 Dans Avenue, which is the property adjoining the northeast corner of the proposed development site. I fully support the recommendation for refusal of the DA by Mr. Lewis Curry from Randwick City Council. The report, in our opinion, is thorough and comprehensive, and the rationale set out by Mr. Curry and his colleagues for the recommendation is, in our view, quite compelling. We would urge the panel to accept that recommendation. The panel will have read our detailed objection, but I wanted to really reiterate two key points from the perspective of an owner-occupier of one of the adjoining properties. What is proposed cannot be considered a home business. There are technical reasons why it sits outside Council's definition of home business, clearly established by Mr. Curry. Amongst other things, they go to floor space and the nature of proposed new structures. Beyond this, however, I would like to make two other points. Absent from the application is any reference to the office and administrative space required to run the proposed business. The schedule of bookings, maintenance of accounts, ordering and management of goods and services, etc., will require dedicated office space. Additional floor space will be required for these purposes and should be included in any calculation of overall floor space. Secondly, according to the applicant's own description and aspirations for the business, in excess of 1,000 children will be attending the facility each week. Add parents, carers and siblings to this, and it's not unreasonable to assume total weekly traffic will amount to 2,000 people. This is not a home business. It can only be described as a public-facing recreational and training facility. My second point goes to amenity. The noise, possible odours, additional traffic and general incursion into an otherwise quiet and settled residential neighbourhood will have a significant and negative impact on our amenity. I would request that the panel looks very closely and carefully at this issue. Finally, I want to make a point, not so much as a resident, but as a ratepayer and member of the community. It is in our submission, but I reiterate this point as a health and safety and public liability issue. Access to the existing facility at 35 Division Street is restricted to a 2.44 metre wide path running approximately 47 metres down the side of the residence. Council must consider the implications of no emergency vehicle access being available to the swimming pool. In the event of an accident, which given the numbers of young children using the facility at any given point
Melanie
in time,
Noden from
must
29 Division Street.
Is now exiting.
Sorry, keep going.
The facility at any given point in time must be considered a medium to high level risk. The response time for emergency personnel will be considerable, and equipment they'll be able to bring with them will be restricted. I suggest the risks to council in a number of respects are significant and that the panel should consider this matter. Thank you again for the opportunity to address the panel, and I would urge you to reject this development application.
Thank you. Any questions from the panel members? No. Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Tony Moody.
Chair, panel members, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
My name is Tony Moody, a consultant planner. I fully endorse the recommendation for refusal. I speak on behalf of 8 property owners of 8 properties, adjoining properties. The undesirable features of this DA is one, there are 14 properties adjoining the proposed development site, not 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. As a result of the multiple number of adjoining properties, there are potentially multiple impacts of far greater severity. The Statement of Environmental Effects acknowledges the limited access to this site. It's a narrow pedestrian access corridor. And I think the previous speaker spoke very cogently about emergency vehicles. 3, there's no parking on site, again because of the limited access. 4, there are potentially 9 or 18 buses, the range provided in the SEE, of students. It could be up in the order of 150 children plus ancillary plus associated parents. We've all been to swimming classes. We all support swimming classes. There's no question about that. But what we have is, in my view, an undesirable location. The next point is the Environmental Health Officer reviewed the acoustic report both in its original amended form and found it unsatisfactory. The council officers say any plan of management is unmanageable because of the scale of the use, the number of properties and the children involved. I totally agree. The council's traffic engineer did not support the application, in fact carried out his own traffic and parking surveys and found that the parking demand all on street represents an undesirable burden. Can I just say on home business, this is not a home business. It's not ancillary to a dwelling, it is primary use. And as the chair and panel members well know, one doesn't have to be subordinate to another. You can have 2 uses, and this swimming pool is, in my respectful view, an independent, although associated, but outdoor recreation facility. The application, in council officers' view, relies upon proposed landscaping. As you are aware, panel members, Super Studios v Waverley Council says that proposed landscaping should be given minor weight. The council, in terms of parking demand, there's a severe deficiency. Simply put, I fully endorse the recommendation for refusal on the reasons raised not only by Lewis Curry, but all fellow senior council officers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions from the panel? No?
Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Michael Vine. Yours on behalf of the applicant.
Yes, I am. Thank you, panel members. And given the available time frame to address the panel, I'll focus on the refusal reasons, and I'll invite any comments that the panel may have following that, and I'm more than happy to address those. Now, from, I guess, reviewing the officer's report, it's abundantly obvious that the officers aren't comfortable with the definition of a home business activity on the site. This is something that we have thought about at length, and I'm more than happy to explain the rationale behind why we've done that. And I think in doing so, it's important to understand the existing site, how long the site's been there for, the activity that's occurred at the site, and the nature of what we're changing here when considering the impacts of this development. Now, The property contains 2 tennis courts. 2 tennis courts have existed at the property. We've been told anecdotally since 1910. I've looked at the 1943 aerial photographs where 2 tennis courts have existed in conjunction with the existing dwelling. There's been a long-standing and established use of this particular site as a tennis facility associated with the dwelling, and that's principally used for coaching, in one-on-one lessons, group coaching, school events, and school club tennis type activities. The tennis court has floodlights approved, allowing it to be used well into the evening. And similar to the tennis courts themselves that have been around forever, and the use has been established forever, there's no existing formalised operational approval for any commercial type use for this property. But we believe that that this is, I mean, given the fact that there's 2 tennis courts, there's an existing dwelling that exists on the property. The principal purpose for this activity is the coaching of tennis on this particular site by the residents that live within the dwelling. There's a very clear nexus between the residential activity and the business itself to fall within the definition of a home business. And aside from the impacts, which I can speak about later, the operator of the facility has identified a market opportunity to diversify the existing recreational activity at the site, and in the form of a swimming coaching centre. The idea with the swimming coaching centre is to I guess delete 1 tennis court, or sort of surrender that element of the activity and introduce another level of activity, hoping that that there's no sort of measurable increase over and above what exists. And as part of that diversification, there is no changes to coaching staff. There's no changes to the intended capacity of people coming to the centre. And I may actually need another minute, if that's okay. And as I'm also happy to obviously take questions on the refusal reasons. Thank you. But in terms of the
so I'll grant you another minute. Sorry.
Okay, great. So just running very quickly through this, in terms of the permissibility of this and the land use classification, there's the property at number 36 Arden Street, Clovelly, and the DA number is DA 352 of 2017. This is an approval for a swimming pool in association with a home business. It's the same nature. Occupants live within the premises. It's a commercial run activity with a home base element endorsed by Randwick City Council for this exact same activity. What we have here is a diversification of a current home-based recreation facility activity, and it's diversified to allow coaching in a different form. On the parking front, we've undertaken parking studies by our traffic consultant, and there's been identified as significant vacancies within the premises. And there's lots of numbers going around about likely demand and increase, but our idea with having the home business activity would be to not generate any additions, and that's why the de facto cap of the actual land use term itself, which limits numbers of staff, is a de facto limitation on the actual numbers of patrons that come forward. I don't understand why there would be any benefit served by council to require this to be a commercialised activity, when the whole idea of that the client wanted to basically say to the community and to council, this is an existing home-based situation. It won't change to be a commercialised situation. It will maintain a connection to the dwelling. It will maintain an intensity of use that's inherently linked to its definition and permissibility. So I'm happy to take questions on the technical side from the parking, also the technical side of the acoustic reports, which we've had done and we've had modelling done. And reading council's report, it simply says that the environmental health officer very clearly says, off the back of the acoustic report, identifying clear computer modelling and an inaudible increase in noise levels, the environmental health officer says, and I'll quote him, it's considered that based on the additional use of the pool, a projected noise of approximately 14 dBA resulting from the proposed swim school is not appropriate.
All right, I'll just interrupt you there because you are going over your extension. So
okay.
And there are probably questions from the panel
that's
members.
Fine.
So unless you've got anything that you want
I just wanted to, the key thing that I wanted to get across is we're not trying to be clever and tricky and conniving. the idea with the land use definition was to say we don't want to commercialize this. We don't want to get this approval for a recreation facility and in 2 years' time apply for an increase by doubling our patron numbers. We want to basically make the use a home-based, linked to the dwelling, linked to the residents, not changing the number of coaching staff that currently exists under the current operational arrangements, and to ensure that there's a net neutralised impact by replacing one activity with another with the same coaching staff. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the panel members? No questions?
Not from me, no.
All right. So just one clarification. You mentioned that the floodlights have been approved. Can you just tell me when and how they were approved?
The floodlights were approved at the property, and I can just pull up the, I believe I've got the background documents for those. They were approved. We basically did a JIPA request to get all the information for the site to see what's currently approved. The only thing that came back, I think there was some fencing changes, and there was the approval for the floodlights. Without sort of fumbling through my files now, I'm more than happy to provide that, or council will have it on file, but they absolutely approved the floodlights. And those floodlights will be deleted. So the floodlights associated with the existing tennis court, they will go. The floodlights with the tennis court to be retained will obviously be retained. And, you know, with this neutralised idea of changing one activity with another.
All right, thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes. Thank you, Michelle.
Michael, can you tell me how many people are residing in the property at the moment?
It's a family. So I believe they have children, but I know it's a couple. And I haven't met the children. I don't know the ages, but I believe it's a couple that lives there. They're both involved in coaching. So it's I think one runs more of the admin side of things. The other is the coach. And then I think they call on one or two other staff members to assist them. And that's that's essentially the number of people. And I will say on that point also that the staff and the number of people that work at the facility are also intimately related to the number of people generated by the pool, the new pool element. While we're proposing to basically say there's going to be potentially 3 coaches in the pool with potentially a maximum of 3 people, so a maximum of 9 kids within the pool. If all that attention is focused to the pool, it will be taken off the current tennis centre operation. There's nothing stopping at the moment for there to be 4 existing coaches generating the same group classes and generating the same level of activity. And can I also just make a very quick point on the definition of home business? There's also another land use term that's very important to draw your attention to, and it's an exempt activity, and it's called a home occupation. And the only difference between a home business and a home occupation is the requirement to have a maximum of 2 staff members. Now, the existing tennis courts could continue to run under a home occupation capacity with no staff members, if that's and effectively unfettered by any type of constraints and controls that relate to hours of operation. But what we're sort of saying is, can we formalise this whole situation? Keep it within a very much contained maximum patronage capacity that's inherent to the definition of the land use term, which is a significantly better outcome from a low density area than I don't know. I don't understand the planning benefit served by trying to commercialise this more than we want it to be. It's going to be a low key and very low activity and it just goes to say, just finally on that point, and on not commercialising it, I'll also note that the operator hasn't had any sort of formal complaints or anything put up against him, and it was his understanding that he had a very good local relationship with the residents, and he was obviously surprised to learn that people were objecting against it, and it's fine and they're entitled to do so. But I think it's more of a matter of this being blown up to be bigger than Ben-Hur than what it actually is.
All right, I'll just see if there's any other questions. Any other questions?
Yes, so I do have.
Sorry, I think
you go, Michelle.
Michelle, just have one more, and then Julie.
So sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but the people who are now coaching tennis, are they also qualified swim instructors?
I don't know that, but if they're not, they will become qualified swim instructors. This is a venture they're going into. It's like a diversification of their business. they're only getting so much through tennis, and they're saying, well, let's capture it. Let's do a sort of a different catch-all sort of market. I don't know where there's more money in. I'm not sure, but the people that live in the home will be immediately either coaching, or they'll have 2 qualified swim instructors, and they'll be coaching tennis. Either way, there'll be a continued relationship between those activities and the residents.
Great.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you. And Julie?
Thank you. Mr. Vine, I just wanted your comments on the parking demand.
Yep.
It's outlined in our assessment report on page 340 if you need
Yep.
to refer to it. But
Yep.
basically it's saying that the council assessment officer went and did their own assessment.
Yep.
And because of the volume or the maximum volume of children and the changeover period, we all know that you arrive and park before the previous class has finished, because you want to arrive on time, so that changeover period is important. So council are concluding that it represents a parking demand of 12 spaces greater than the existing situation. And given the topography of that local area and the unlikeliness of public transport, particularly with all the gear that you have, etc., I just wanted your comments on the parking assessment.
Okay. Yeah. Now, the parking assessment has been very much premised on putting this into a sort of a commercial box or a commercialised activity. The parking assessment doesn't necessarily acknowledge the position that we've taken in the fact that, or doesn't acknowledge an existing demand of people, and that being neutralised by a new demand of people. And I'll talk about the way in which that parking, the numbers of people and the likely numbers of people. But council, in providing the numbers on parking demand, have referred straight to a floor area requirement that applies to a recreation facility.
Margaret Matthews
now
is now exiting.
A floor area requirement applying to a swim centre, when it just doesn't make sense. It's more of a function of we're saying that the parking generation and use of this property is entirely limited to coaching and coaching staff. And if the coaching staff aren't changing, they're just changing the activity or the nature of their activity, that there's going to be no sort of significant measurable change in parking that's going to be generated. Now, I know that we did a parking assessment as part of preparing the application documents, which was in August, because that was the time that we did the parking assessment. When they did the parking assessment, there was significant local vacancies, something like between 42 and 70% of vacancies within the time period they modelled. Council's own parking or traffic consultant went out on a couple of different occasions, and I think one of the speakers said he undertook his own parking surveys. I believe it was just an anecdotal recording of whether or not there was lots of parking in the area or not. And I also seem to recall part of his rationale was saying that it's an unfair burden, because we only have a small frontage on this property, it's an unfair burden on properties with larger frontages. I mean, a frontage is part of a public road, which is part of a community, and if there's a status quo of vacancy in it, available, that's to be considered in terms of what additional parking is generated by this use. And fundamentally, I'd like to say that the coaching staff isn't changing. The business, the amount of one-on-one to coaching or to swimming isn't necessarily changing significantly. And so if you're talking about between 50 and 90 parking spaces being available at various parts of the day, if there's a swing up and down of a few parking spaces, it's not going to cause any significant impact to the extent that it's going to change have a significant residential impact.
Any further questions?
Nothing from me, thank you.
All right, so that concludes this that item.
Is it okay? Because there's another refusal reason on the acoustic side of things that council, also that the panel members haven't necessarily interrogated.
I think, well, you actually did mention the acoustic report before,
but I'll just as a very quick statement on the acoustic side of things. The development application on that site that I quoted previously at 36 Arden Street Council approved that that application with an acoustic condition or a report that they required acoustic assessment of the pool equipment to be done, which is a fairly standard approach to ensuring that there's no significant impacts from acoustic as part of the operational once the situation's up and running.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
So that concludes that matter and all the items on the agenda. As I said before, the public meeting will now be closed and the panel will deliberate in closed session. Our decisions and the reasons for our decisions will be placed on Council's website, ideally by tomorrow. So I'll just declare the public meeting closed at 2:47 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.